a list of names, a series of crimes, and a countdown to the final moment. These are the stories of the men scheduled for execution in the United States in 2026. Some call them monsters. Others argue their fate is unjust. But one thing is certain. Each of them has a past written in blood. Let's dive into their chilling cases and the moments that led them to death row. Some crimes shake a city to its core. Some leave wounds that never heal. This is one of them. It was June 25, 2000. Cleveland police officer Wayne Leon, a devoted husband and father, was on duty. Just another day, just another stop. Officer Leon had no idea he was about to walk into a nightmare. He was simply doing his job, pulling over a car with expired plates. Inside, Queasy Bryan, a man with a long and violent criminal history. Bryan had one goal that day, not to go back to prison, and he was willing to do whatever it took to stay free. As Officer Leon reached for his notepad, Bryan made his move. The shot was instant and merciless, a cold-blooded execution. Officer Leon never had a chance. Bryan fled the scene, triggering a massive manhunt. For 2 days, Cleveland was on edge, knowing a cop killer was on the loose. He was finally found hiding in a motel, trying to escape justice. But there was no way out. The jury wasted no time. Bryan was sentenced to death for the cold-blooded murder of Officer Wayne Leon. But Bryan wasn't done fighting. He launched appeal after appeal, trying to escape his fate. Yet the Ohio Supreme Court stood firm. The sentence was upheld. Bryan would pay for his crime. Now, after 26 years on death row, the state of Ohio has set an execution date, January 7, 2026. Some crimes shake a city to its core. Some leave wounds that never heal. This is one of them. It was July 3, 1997, a night that would leave Cleveland in shock. A night when 2 people would lose their lives at the hands of one man, Antonio Sanchez Franklin. Franklin, a career criminal, was no stranger to violence. That night, he pulled out a gun and opened fire. His first victim, 26-year-old Anthony Waters, shot execution style. But Franklin wasn't finished. Just minutes later, he gunned down another man, Curtis Maynard, a 25-year-old who never saw it coming. 2 lives stolen in a matter of minutes. And Franklin? He disappeared into the night, leaving a city in fear. With 2 murders in a single night, police were determined to track Franklin down. And it wouldn't take long before they got their break. Security cameras captured his movements. Within days, the manhunt led officers to an abandoned house where Franklin was hiding out. He thought he could escape justice, but he was wrong. Franklin showed no remorse as the charges were read. 2 counts of aggravated murder. The prosecution didn't hold back. Franklin was a cold-blooded killer who had no regard for human life. The jury wasted no time. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. And the sentence? Death. But Franklin wasn't done fighting. Like many convicted murderers, he launched appeal after appeal, trying to escape his fate. Yet, the Ohio Supreme Court stood firm. The sentence was upheld. Franklin would pay for his crime. Now, after nearly 3 decades on death row, the state of Ohio has set an execution date, which is February 11, 2026. Franklin's time is running out. Some criminal activities are so horrific that their impact is felt for generations, leaving wounds that never close, no matter how much time passes. This is one of those cases. It was January 21, 2005. A night of pure terror in the small town of Brimfield, Ohio. 3 innocent lives were stolen in a senseless act of violence. And the man responsible? James Earl Trimble. Trimble, a military veteran, had a history of domestic abuse. His relationship with Renee Bauer, his longtime girlfriend, had been falling apart. And on that cold January night, it reached a deadly breaking point. Trimble had snapped. He stormed into Renee's home, gun in hand, and opened fire. She never stood a chance. But the horror wasn't over. Trimble's killing spree was just beginning. After murdering Renee, Trimble fled. He needed a place to hide. And that's when he forced his way into a neighbor's home. Inside were 28-year-old Elsie Marcellus and her 7-year-old son, Dakota. Innocent, defenseless. Trimble showed no mercy. He executed Elsie, then turned his gun on Dakota. A mother and son, gone in an instant. Their only crime? Being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Trimble was now on the run, and Ohio was on high alert. Armed, dangerous, and willing to kill again. For hours he eluded capture, but there was nowhere left to hide. As law enforcement closed in, Trimble made a desperate move. He took a woman hostage. For hours, Trimble held the woman at gunpoint. Police knew they had to end this before more lives were lost. And finally, after a terrifying standoff, Trimble was taken into custody. Trimble showed no remorse as the charges were read. 3 counts of aggravated murder. Kidnapping. A jury had one choice. Death, a sentence for a man who showed no mercy to his victims. But like so many on death row, Trimble fought back. He filed appeal after appeal, hoping to escape his fate. Yet the Ohio Supreme Court stood firm. The sentence was upheld. Trimble would pay for his crimes. Now, after decades on death row, Ohio has set an execution date which is now set for March 12, 2026, over 21 years after his crimes. The countdown to justice has begun. Some killers act in the heat of the moment, rage overtaking reason, leaving chaos in their wake. But others, the cold and calculating ones, commit their crimes with chilling precision. They plan, they manipulate, and they kill with purpose. Gerald Robert Hand was one of them. He didn't just kill once, he killed twice, and each time it was for one thing: money. Gerald Hand was a man who thought he could outsmart the system. His first wife's death was suspicious, yet he walked away a free man, with her life insurance money in his pocket. The authorities couldn't prove what they suspected, that Hand had orchestrated her death for financial gain. Years passed. He remarried, again and again. But in 2002, history repeated itself in a terrifyingly familiar way. Hand's fourth wife, Jill Hand, was murdered in what appeared to be a brutal home invasion. The crime scene was chaotic. Signs of a struggle, a shattered sense of security, and a grieving husband who claimed to be just another victim. But this time, detectives weren't so easily fooled. As investigators dug deeper, the cracks in Hand's story became undeniable. The so-called home invasion was anything but random. Evidence painted a far more sinister picture, one where Hand was not a grieving husband, but a cold-blooded mastermind. Detectives discovered that Hand had been hiring hitmen to eliminate his spouses. Each time, his goal was the same: collect the insurance payout and move on. His wives were nothing more than financial stepping stones, disposable pieces in his twisted game. Hand had fooled the system once, but he wouldn't fool it again. By 2003, the case against him was airtight. His web of lies had unraveled, and the jury saw through his act. The sentence was swift and final: death. For over 2 decades, Gerald Hand has sat on death row, waiting. He's watched the years slip by, filing appeal after appeal, hoping for another loophole, another escape. But justice, though slow, has not forgotten him. Now, 24 years after his conviction, the final chapter is about to be written. The state of Ohio has set Hand's execution for June 17, 2026. The delays are over. His final attempt to evade justice has failed. Cleveland Ramon Jackson thought he could escape justice. He was wrong. Some killers act in the heat of the moment. Others plan their crimes with chilling precision. And then there are those like Cleveland Ramon Jackson, ruthless, calculating, and utterly remorseless. It was January 2002 in Lima, Ohio. A home that should have been a place of safety became a scene of horror. Jackson and an accomplice stormed into an apartment, guns drawn, demanding money, drugs, and valuables. Inside were 8 people, including 3 children. What happened next was pure brutality. Jackson showed no mercy. He opened fire, striking 6 of the 8 occupants. Among the victims, 17-year-old Lenashia Williams and 3-year-old Jayla Grant. Neither survived. A teenager with her whole life ahead of her. A toddler who barely had a chance to live. Both executed in cold blood. Survivors played dead, praying for the nightmare to end. When Jackson finally fled, they were left in pools of their own blood, forever scarred by the violence they had just witnessed. But Jackson's attempt to escape justice was short-lived. He was caught, tried, and convicted of aggravated murder. The jury had no sympathy. They saw him for what he was, a killer with no remorse. Their verdict? Death. For more than 2 decades, Jackson has sat on death row, exhausting every possible appeal. But time has run out. The state of Ohio has set his execution date, July 15, 2026. The families of his victims have waited over 20 years for justice. And now, the end is near for Cleveland Ramon Jackson. Some killers strike in a moment of blind rage. Others plan their crimes with a chilling calculation. And then there are those like James Derek O'Neill, who kill without remorse, leaving behind a trail of devastation. O'Neill was no stranger to violence. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a predator. And in 1993, his brutality reached horrifying new heights. It was a night that would change lives forever. In Columbus, Ohio, a city that had seen its fair share of crime, few were prepared for what was about to unfold. O'Neill, armed and merciless, set his sights on 60-year-old Annetta Howell, a woman who had done nothing to deserve the nightmare that awaited her. She was in her home, a place that should have been safe. But when O'Neill entered, safety became an illusion. He wasn't there to rob, to threaten, or to intimidate. He was there to kill. The attack was brutal. Howell was shot and left to die in her own home, the place she had built a life. And O'Neill? He vanished into the night, believing he could outrun justice. But the law was closing in. Witnesses, forensic evidence, and tireless detectives pieced together what had happened. O'Neill had left behind more than just chaos. He left a trail. And that trail led straight to him. His past spoke volumes, a history of violence, a disregard for human life, and a pattern that prosecutors wouldn't ignore. In 1994, James Derek O'Neill stood before a jury. The evidence was overwhelming. The crime was senseless. And the verdict? Guilty. The sentence? Death. But even behind bars, O'Neill wasn't done fighting. For decades, he appealed, challenged, and attempted to delay the inevitable. Legal battles stretched on year after year. But in the end, there was no escaping justice. After more than 3 decades on death row, O'Neill's time is finally running out. Ohio has set his execution date. Soon the state will close the book on a case that has haunted the victims' families for far too long. James Derek O'Neill believed he could take a life and walk away. He believed he could outlast the system. But justice, though delayed, is never denied. And in 2026, Ohio will ensure that his reign of terror comes to an end. Some killers act in the heat of the moment. Others, like Gerald Hand, plan their crimes with chilling precision. Hand didn't just kill once. He killed twice. And each time, it was for one reason: money. Gerald Robert Hand was a man who believed he could commit the perfect crime, twice. He was a respected businessman, a family man. But behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. In 1976, tragedy struck when his first wife, Donna, was found dead under mysterious circumstances. Hand, the grieving husband, collected her life insurance payout. The case remained unsolved, and authorities couldn't prove his involvement, so he walked free. Years passed. Hand remarried. Then again. And again. 3 more wives. But one thing never changed: his greed. Fast forward to 2002. Hand's fourth wife, Jill Hand, was found murdered in their home. This time, the crime scene told a story. A staged home invasion meant to look like a robbery gone wrong. But detectives weren't fooled. The so-called burglars had left everything of value behind. No forced entry, no stolen jewelry, just a woman brutally murdered and a husband with everything to gain. The investigation dug deeper into Hand's past, uncovering a horrifying pattern. Hand wasn't just unlucky in marriage, he was eliminating his wives for financial gain. And this time, there was no escaping justice. Prosecutors presented their case, showing how Hand had been hiring hitmen to carry out his deadly scheme. His own greed and arrogance became his downfall. In 2003, the jury wasted no time. Hand was sentenced to death. For over 2 decades, he sat on death row, filing appeal after appeal, trying to delay the inevitable. But now, time is running out. After 24 years, Ohio has set an execution date, June 17, 2026. Gerald Robert Hand believed he could get away with murder. He believed he could outsmart the law. But in just months, the state of Ohio will ensure that his reign of terror comes to an end. Some crimes are so violent, so senseless, that they leave entire communities shaken. They instill fear. They rob families of their loved ones. They remind us of the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface. That was the case with Jerome Henderson, a convicted murderer who has spent decades fighting to escape his fate. But now, after 30 years on death row, his time is running out. It was May 1995. Elmore Brunson, a 58-year-old husband and father, was at home with his wife in Cleveland, Ohio. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening until the nightmare began. A shadow appeared in the doorway. A stranger, number A predator. Jerome Henderson forced his way inside, armed and dangerous. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was calculated. He wanted money. He wanted control. But when Elmore refused to comply, Henderson's true intentions became horrifyingly clear. The first shot rang out like a thunderclap. Then another, and another. Elmore Brunson was struck multiple times, his body crumbling to the floor. His wife, his partner in life, was left helpless, forced to watch the horror unfold, knowing she could be next. The killer didn't just take a man's life. He shattered a family. He stole a future. And then, he vanished into the night. But Henderson wasn't as smart as he thought. The Cleveland police tracked him down within hours. His past told the story of a violent man, a career criminal who had long been walking the line between freedom and a prison cell. This time, there would be no escape. In 1996, Jerome Henderson was convicted of murder, burglary, and armed robbery. The jury didn't need long to decide. He was sentenced to death. But as the years passed, Henderson refused to accept his fate. Appeal after appeal. Motion after motion. For 30 years, he fought to avoid execution, arguing for a second chance he never gave his victim. But the clock is ticking, and the state of Ohio has made its decision. The sentence will be carried out on October 21st, 2026. After 3 decades of delays, the family of Elmore Brunson will finally see justice served. Some crimes linger in the minds of a city for decades. Some cases seem to stretch on forever, with endless appeals, legal battles, and delays. But for Melvin D. Bunnell Jr., time has finally run out. After nearly 40 years of courtrooms, motions, and last-minute stays, the state of Ohio is ready to carry out his sentence. His execution date is set, marking the end of one of the longest-running death row cases in Ohio's history. It was a cold night in November 1986. In a quiet Cleveland apartment, 23-year-old Robert Bunner was enjoying a peaceful evening, completely unaware that his life was about to be stolen in a burst of violence. Suddenly, his front door crashed open. The intruder? Melvin Bunnell. And he didn't come to talk. Within seconds, gunfire rang out. 2 shots, point blank, straight to the chest. Bunner collapsed, blood soaking through his shirt as his life slipped away. The walls of his home, once a place of safety, became the backdrop to a senseless execution. Neighbors heard the gunshots. They called 911, but by the time police arrived, there was nothing they could do. Robert Bunner was dead. And Melvin Bunnell? He was already on the run. Bunnell thought he could escape, but the city of Cleveland was watching. Witnesses had seen him fleeing the scene, and the evidence against him piled up fast. The murder weapon? Recovered. The bullet casings? Matched to Bunnell's gun. And when they finally caught up with him, his clothes were still stained with blood. There was no question. Melvin Bunnell had pulled the trigger. The trial was swift. The jury didn't hesitate. By 1988, Bunnell was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But the story didn't end there. For nearly 4 decades, Bunnell fought his fate. Appeal after appeal, hearing after hearing, he used every legal loophole available to him. He challenged the evidence. He questioned the trial's fairness. His attorneys argued over forensic details, procedural errors, and his right to new DNA testing. Each time his execution neared, a new motion delayed it. Victims' families waited. Years turned into decades. But now, the waiting is over. Ohio has set Melvin Bunnell's final execution date for November 18, 2026. The delays are over. The legal battles are done. And after nearly 40 years, the book on this case is finally closing. Some crimes are so horrifying, so unimaginable, that they leave an entire community scarred forever. This is one of them. It was September 10, 1985. 12-year-old Raymond Fife left home on his bike, just like he had done so many times before. But this time, he never came back. When Raymond didn't return home for dinner, his family panicked. Hours passed. Then the search began. At 9 p.m., Raymond's father made a discovery that would haunt him forever. His son's body was found in an overgrown field, tortured beyond belief. Raymond had been beaten, strangled, sexually assaulted, and set on fire. His injuries were so severe that doctors couldn't believe he had survived even a few hours. For 2 days, Raymond fought for his life, but the brutality was too much. On September 12, he took his final breath. It didn't take long for police to zero in on their suspect, 18-year-old Danny Lee Hill. And what did he do next? It was as disturbing as the crime itself. Hill inserted himself into the investigation, acting like a concerned citizen. But something was off. He knew details about the crime that hadn't been made public. Under questioning, Hill's story kept changing. At one point, he even laughed while describing the attack. That was all the police needed. The jury wasted no time. Danny Lee Hill was sentenced to death. The judge called his crimes pure evil, a level of cruelty beyond comprehension. But justice would be delayed. Hill spent nearly 4 decades on death row, appealing his sentence again and again. His lawyers claimed he had intellectual disabilities and that he was unfit for execution. But in 2023, Ohio courts made a final ruling. Danny Lee Hill would be executed on July 22, 2026, and the state of Ohio is preparing to carry out his sentence. 9 names, 9 crimes, and a justice system that has determined their fate. But the debate over capital punishment continues. Should these men pay the ultimate price? Or is there another side to the story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.